Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I hope you are well, inshallah ta'ala. Uh, a lovely Friday, a blessed Friday to all of you in the UK. We are coming towards Maghrib soon. So it's a blessed moment where du'as are accepted, people's supplications are accepted, inshallah ta'ala. We know from various ahadith that there are certain moments during the day, during the week, during the year when our supplications are more likely to be accepted than at other times because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, has designated by his own decree that certain moments, certain times have greater significance than other times. So we make dua to Allah that first and foremost that He alleviates the suffering of our Muslim brothers and sisters all over the Muslim world, in particular in places like Gaza, which you are all familiar with, you are all well acquainted with what is happening over there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for everyone bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We've had some questions that have come through on this topic, so I want to deal with the questions in a few moments, but I want to take questions from you first and foremost. If you have any questions before I take the questions from the email on particular topics that you'd like to address, that you'd like to deal with, then we can do that first and foremost. So please let me hear your questions on here first. Salam to all of you. Next week, we'll keep it the same time. I know the UK time is going to shift this weekend, so we should be okay. So next we will keep it 5 p.m. because people have the habit as well are coming at this time. So let's keep it at 5 p.m. from next week onwards as well, bi'iznillahi ta'ala. Yesterday I was in a masjid in Burnley, Shah Jalal Masjid, and I'd been asked to talk about the Palestine Israel war. And I spoke about a number of things in there. Uh, I hope at some point in next few weeks that video will be available for you all to perhaps watch and benefit from bi'iznillahi ta'ala. I've also been very busy with a few other things, family commitments. I've been very well recently too as well. But alhamdulillah, I think I'm on the way to recovery now. So that's good news for all of us. One of the things that I talked about yesterday was this unfortunate habit that Muslims seem to fall into every single time there's a crisis. I've coined a phrase for it, which is cannibal Islam, which is basically when things become difficult for us, when things become a challenge for us, what we do is we start to blame our fellow Muslim brothers and sisters. So we accuse them of certain issues, certain problems. So we point fingers at them. And especially when what's happening at the moment, what we've noticed among certain places is that Muslims are attacking fellow Muslims rather than speaking out more forcefully about the injustice and the zulm and oppression that's taking place in Gaza and the West Bank and these sort of places. What seems to be happening is that Muslims, some of them, find that it's an opportune time to attack individual Muslims or to attack organizations publicly. So I'm saying the word publicly is important. There's nothing wrong with criticizing someone. There's nothing wrong with critiquing someone's position on a certain thing. But what needs to be called out is when people use these times of crisis to publicly attack or denigrate someone. That becomes deeply problematic. Because why? Obviously, it shows weakness in the Muslim community. It shows that we are divided and we should not be washing our dirty laundry in the public. This is something that I'm very keen on. I have lots of differences with lots of people on many, many issues. Some people I've decided over time just to ignore them, just to not give them any attention, simply because I know that they have an agenda. Certain people, they are sincere friends. I've had friends who've reached out to me and said, Maulana, you said something, or you wrote something, or you tweeted about something, I have an issue with it. And because they're sincere people, and I know that they come from a place of love, I'll engage with them. And maybe next time I'll be more careful. But because they've engaged with me with adab and with respect, I've taken their feedback on, and next time I'll be more careful. And sometimes I might even reach out to them beforehand. But what we shouldn't be doing is publicly assassinating our own brothers and sisters. And what we should be saying to them is, look, you did this. Perhaps next time you should think about this. And that makes it easy for us to engage with one another. Okay, so this is an important thing I think we need to just be aware of, especially in times of crisis. We're all emotional, and many of us will be angry and upset. And this naturally happens when you're angry and upset. You're always looking for someone else to blame. You're always looking for someone to put the blame on, and that's not healthy when we're dealing with a crisis. So we should come together, and we should carry on critiquing, criticizing one another as we do, but we should be doing it in a way that's not showing weakness, and we should not have bad opinions of people. This is another problem that we have. Su'ul dhan. A lot of people interpret the worst about somebody because they have bias. They've already decided their views on somebody or how they're going to perceive somebody. So whatever that person does, they are always going to be immoral. They're always going to be wrong. And that's kind of like a spiritual disease. That doesn't mean we kind of like fall foul of people taking advantage of us. But what it means is that when we're dealing with believers, Muslims, our default should be to have a good opinion of them, right? So that's important. With regards to Palestine and Israel, I have in the past mentioned books that people should read and can read, academic books, but books that are worth reading. We talked about some of them yesterday. So people can get those books. You should purchase those books and read those books to get a deeper understanding of the history. And one should go back even further. So we're not just talking about 1948, which of course is a watershed moment in the conflict, in the war, but we can go back to 1492. If you don't know what happened in 1492, then you might want to go back and read up on why 1492 is important, because it's the seeds that were planted for colonialism, the idea of ethnic cleansing, the idea of Jews and Muslims, the Moors as they were called, being kicked out and murdered or being forced to convert in Iberia, on the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. And when as we were told in our history lesson, Christopher Columbus discovered, so to speak, America. And when he discovered America, it wasn't genuinely a nice thing because people were literally wiped out. America was built upon ethnic cleansing. Indians were wiped out. Many of you who are old enough will remember the movies that depict Indians, the people who are being colonized, as savages. Exactly what's happening in Palestine now. It's the Palestinians that are savages. They are the people who are wrong, even though they've been there for centuries. So this has a long history. So we should be aware of these things as we engage with our history and our tradition, and we should be fully trained in dealing with some of these objections. So I hope that's been a useful introduction. We did have a few questions on certain books that people could read. Someone asked about the particular book on Tasawwuf that is in English that someone could read, so I just brought it up. This is the one I mentioned last time, Sufis and Sharia by Samir Dajani, good friend of mine based in London. He's written this book. As you can see, I've read the book and I continue to benefit from the book. So that's a useful book to read if you want kind of like an update on Ibn Arabi and his ideas and his thoughts and reflections as well. Someone messaged me something else. They wanted something in English on the development on hadith. I perhaps mentioned at some point on the development of the hadith sciences. And someone asked a question about hadith books that they can read, or history of hadith. I don't know if you can buy this book, but there is a PDF of it. It's called India's Contribution to the Study of Hadith Literature. A very useful book, very well researched, and I'd recommend people read this book. It's by someone called Muhammad Ishaq, and I do recommend people read this if you want to know about the development of hadith in India or Hindustan. And it predates, even before Shah Waliullah. So Shah Waliullah Dehlavi is obviously well known for being one of the founders or one of the scholars who revived, if you like, the study of hadith in the subcontinent. But there were also other ulama who, if you like, preceded him in bringing hadith to the subcontinent. So many ulama, there were many scholars there. It has a very rich history and a rich pedigree in bringing hadith to the Indian subcontinent. And you had scholars even in the 10th century. For example, Sheikh Ali Muttaqi al-Hindi, who died in 975 Hijri, and he had a sheikh or a student called Muhammad Tahir Patani. There's some discussion around how his surname is pronounced, but they came and they wrote books, and one of the most famous books that many of you will know is a book called Kanzul Ummal fi Sun al-Aqwal wal Af'al. It's deemed to be one of the largest collection of hadith, and this was produced in the subcontinent. Muhammad Tahir Patni, Sheikh Patani, was from Gujarat. So you had many ulama like this. You also had another Sheikh, Sheikh Abdul Haq Dehlawi, rahmatullahi alayhi, who died in 1052 Hijri, and he came back from the Hijaz, and in Delhi he wrote on the topic of hadith and the importance of hadith as well. So even before this, you had many ulama who were writing on this subject, many ulama who were producing books on this topic before Shah. Oh, it's back on. So you can read all of that on in your own time. So I just wanted to share those references with you. There's something that came to my mind, like a shorter one written by a fellow friend, Maulana Muntasir Zaman. Many of you know Will Muntasir, and if you don't know him, you should follow him. He has a website, and he has ways of reaching out. And he wrote this little short pamphlet on hadith scholarship in the Indian subcontinent. And this is on Sheikh Ahmad Ali Saharanpuri, rahmatullahi alayhi, and his important work as well. So you should all have a copy of this. It's very accessible, and it's been endorsed by one of our teachers, Mufti Shabir, who's actually the Sheikh al-Hadith in a Darul Ulum, in a seminary here in Blackburn. So worth getting that book as well. So these are some things that I've recommended. Some people have contacted me about things to read on this topic. So hopefully that's been a good introduction or useful introduction to the topic in particular. Let's see if there's any more questions. I'm just going to log on to my account to see if there's any more questions in particular. And you can also, of course, pose questions as I am talking and as I am looking at the inbox. Let's have a look. We had some more. Okay. We have Akbarian. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. So I've given you reference to the book that you can perhaps read on. Another one, Akbarian, you can read is, if it helps, it's quite academic actually, but it's by Khalid Al-Ruwayhib. And the book is called Islamic Intellectual History in the 17th Century. And it's a very interesting book. And in that book, so the book is divided into 3 parts. And in the final part of that book, there's a discussion on the important topic of Wahdatul Wujud or Wahdatul Shuhud. If you don't know of this, you don't need to worry about it. But this is the book, worth reading. And he has some really interesting discussions in there on the whole topic. So if you're interested in that, you can read that in your own time, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. A few people have asked also, I think I got a question last time about political engagement, and there's a debate taking place amongst the Muslim community in particular, whether, because we have ministers, or not ministers, but we have politicians, we have councillors who are part of certain parties, and there's a debate as to whether Muslims should ask them to resign because of their leaders not calling for a ceasefire, for example. And one school says that they should resign, and one school says they should stay there because at least if they're there, they're able to have a positive impact. They're at the dinner table, they're at the dastarkhan, if you like, and they're able to raise their voices. And the nature of politics is you're not always going to get what you want, but you can always put pressure. It's about lobbying. It's about putting pressure on people. You can't have a tantrum and get what you want all the time, especially because we're living in a country which is not Muslim, and the people that live in this country, a majority of them are not Muslim, and we're living here, if you like, as a minority. So we have to bargain and work. So some ulama and some people and some Muslims will take the position that no, they should all resign to show that we don't stand for this particular position. And some people will say no, we stay there, but we continue putting pressure. I think the important thing is this is a political discussion. This is a strategic question, and there can be room for differences in here. So the point I'm making is this isn't like a theological question. This isn't like an akida question, or this isn't like a legal question that someone who takes a certain position, perhaps whichever position they take, they're somehow not a Muslim, or they're a bad Muslim, or they're an immoral Muslim. We shouldn't fall into a trap. This is siyasa. And in siyasa, there's a lot more room for negotiation. There's a lot more room for giving different views. And people can give different views, and they are entitled to give those views. And especially because this is new ground for us as Muslims, because historically, like I mentioned before, our ancestors lived in Muslim lands. So they had templates, they had ideas of how to run things. The rulers were Muslims, at least if nominally, and they made decisions on our behalf, and we trusted them. If we had problems with them, we'd raise questions with them. But since many of us, through our grandparents, have migrated to the West for the first time in large numbers, we've settled in Europe, in France, in Britain, in America, Australia, and all these lands, then the context has dramatically shifted. And so, therefore, we need to think carefully about how we play, how we position ourselves in the West. That's the second thing. The third thing I think is really important is, and I mentioned this yesterday, is if you're following what's happening, at least in the West, there are huge culture wars taking place between the right and the left. So, people who are hardcore right wing, who very nationalistic, they believe that the nation only belongs to a certain group of people or certain colored people. And then you have another side, which is the liberal side, and they're sort of fighting against each other, and they're using different communities for their own agendas. And part of that is to pit Muslims against Jews. So Muslims in Britain against Jews in Britain. I'm not talking about elsewhere, I'm just talking about our country. And they are siding with one group or the other and using them as fodder for their own agendas. And so we have to be alert to that as well. We have to be alert that we're not played in this game. And one group are baiting Muslims. They are dangling carrots in front of us. They are showing negative images or portrayals of Muslims. Some of them not even true, just for Muslims to react. And if Muslims react to it, then they show then they can show to others that, oh, these Muslims are really like intolerant, savages, which has always been the portrayal of Muslims in the West. Like we've always been seen as savages in portrayals. So it feeds that narrative. And there's another agenda which is like showing us as all liberal and all airy fairy. So we have to kind of be careful. We have to know that there's a game being played, and we have to kind of navigate very, very carefully in that as well. Some of these battles are not ours to fight. They're uniquely European problems, but we have to be aware of them, because there's a rise of far right extremism in Britain, and they've decided who they're going to side with, and they're going to use Muslims and other religious communities or minorities for their own agendas. So we just need to be aware of that. And I've said before that you can be critical of Israel, and you should be, and in any state that engages in killing or ethnic cleansing or bombardment of innocent civilians. You can be absolutely critical, but that doesn't make you anti-Semitic. Right? That doesn't mean that you hate a certain religious group. What it means is that you're criticizing the actions of that nation state, what it's doing. Just like you would criticize any other country. If any other country was doing something wrong, you would criticize the government of that country, and you would call for that government to stop doing what they're doing. It doesn't mean you hate the people of that country. It doesn't mean that. Or if their people live here with us, it doesn't mean you hate them. That's a false analogy that certain people want to use to sow division. So we just need to be aware of that. I know we're all emotional and we can all be angry, but we also need to remain just, and we also need to remain fair as the Quran. Allah reminds us in the Quran to do this. Um, Akbarian, you haven't got that book, you haven't read it yet. Oh, you've got the book, but you haven't read it yet. Yeah, read it in your own time, and inshallah, you'll find it very useful. Alongside that, read Dalal's book. I think I mentioned it before. Read that book, that's very useful as well. Ibrahim, Hijrah is compulsory. Where are you going to make Hijrah to, Ibrahim? Tell me where you're going to go to. I mean, where do you go to? Can we? I mean, at the moment, we can still practice our faith, and we should practice our faith, and we should use the liberties and the democratic processes that we have. Um, that we should use it to call out injustice. We have a democratic. We shouldn't feel somehow on the back foot, right? We shouldn't have somehow feel on the back foot. We should use democratic processes. We're living in this country. We should call our government, our MPs, our leaders. We should take them to task. And just like anything else that we would do, just like any other cause that we would feel that's important, we should be part of that. And it means if it means we need to have alliances with people, we should be doing that because they are our elected representatives. They're meant to represent the will of the people. So we're supposed to stay here. We're supposed to raise our voices, and as people have done, they've been protesting. I'm sure the protests that have happened in London and elsewhere gives some solace, even if it's a little bit, to the Palestinians as well. So that's important to bear in mind. So we have to become a voice of justice, a voice of sanity here as well. Bridge Crossbreaker. I don't. Salam alaikum. Please, what book? If you just repeat the question, I'll try and get the answer for you. Aziz, salam alaikum. Maulana. Indeed, self is so crucial these days. Unfortunately, many Muslim companions sounds like Western. Yeah, so I sent I often do this, Aziz. You probably saw my WhatsApp channel, which we have, where I talked about sometimes we feel like we have to apologize, or we always compare ourselves to the West. And this is something Ibn Khaldun talks about in his Muqaddamah, and there's also a term for it, which is called mimetic rivalry, or mimesis. And basically, what happens is, and Yusha Patel in his recent book talks about this, where when you're defeated, when you're conquered, what happens is the conqueror, because he's now the one that's above you, you see them as like everything that you should try and become. You start to mimic them, you start to copy them. So this is important. Sometimes we've sought to follow our conquerors, and Ibn Khaldun talks about this in his Muqaddamah. You should read it; it's in there. And Yusha Patel, like I said, talks about in his book. So it's a form of mimetic rivalry. And what happens is, as a result, we also have inferiority complex. So people will always say, they'll always say to you like things like, "Oh, why has the Muslim world not developed the way the West has? Like our development is different. Why is it always compared to the West? Why don't you compare the Muslim world to China? Why don't you compare the Muslim world to another civilization? Why is everything always compared to the West?" And this is consciously done. You see this in the media, you see this all the time. But we have our own way, we have our own values, we have our own akhlaq, we have our own visions, we have our own civilizations, we have our own usuls, right? And we have our own principles. If we start following the West in everything that we do, then we're going to fall into the same problems that they're falling in right now, which is a deterioration of their society, which is a fragmentation of their society, a society that's increasingly fractured, where it's all about nafsani, it's all about me. We're supposed to make the civilization better. We're not anti-West. You must understand this. We are not anti anything, right? We are here to make the world a better place. We are here to bring justice. We are here to make sure the highest standards of akhlaq and ethics and morality are pursued everywhere. We are here to remind people of their obligation to God, just like Musa reminded Pharaoh. Okay, so we should be people who stand up for higher levels of akhlaq, higher levels of morality. I hope that makes sense, inshallah ta'ala, Aziz. Okay. I think you're talking about end of time. I don't believe on all too much into this end of time thing. It's been happening time and time again. The Muslim world has its ups and downs. Allah Ta'ala can change things tomorrow. Tomorrow, Palestine could be liberated. Allah Ta'ala can change things like this. So we should always continue to do what we can and have faith in Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Okay. Ibrahim Ahmed, what are your thoughts on taking from other madhab but fulfilling? Yeah, I mean, the simple rule here is you try and follow the school that you're following, the legal school that you're following, and you follow the school of your imam because he or the scholar that you follow. And if it becomes difficult, then you can follow another school. If it becomes difficult, it becomes burdensome to follow the school that you're following for whatever reason, then you can take from other madhahib. But try as much as you can to maintain a certain fidelity to particular madhab that you're following because you're following the methodology. But sometimes it might become that you're not able to do that. Then it's a different matter, Ibrahim. I hope that makes sense. That's a general gist of my approach. I mean, for example, I follow the Hanafi school in its broader sense, but sometimes it might become difficult, and so you don't need to become, really militant or strict about it. And then it can work, and this is well known. Okay. Sometimes you might even through your own research come to a different conclusion, then that's fine. If you've done your own research and you come to a different conclusion, then that's fine. But also remember, Ibrahim, that if your community is following a certain position, whether you agree with it or not, don't rock the boat by going in there all gun ho and try and change everything. Bring reform in slowly, bring change in slowly. And if it's something that's mukhtalafi, something that's not like a bid'ah or something that's not haram that they're doing, which is very rare, then let it go. Raise concerns, but in your own way, do what you can, but be balanced because you've got to keep the community. You've got to keep the community united, not fragmented. So, for example, I have a lot of personal positions on lots of issues, but in a community, I don't really talk about it in the masjid. Someone comes to me privately, I'll tell them, yani, do this. But on the mimbar, I avoid getting into detailed legal discussions, simply because people are following things. If somebody comes to me, I'll explain to them that this is my position. If you want to take it, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. But I don't go around because one of my teachers, Mufti Kamul Haq Sahab, may Allah preserve him, mentioned that fiqh issues, especially if they're contentious issues, don't bring them into the public realm. Let people come and speak to you privately. And the second thing is don't force your views upon people. If something is a legitimate difference of opinion amongst the jurists, then one should not force a view, or one should not, at least if not do that, one should not attack a different view. One should not denigrate or cancel somebody because they have a different view. You should argue it out privately or whatever it may be, but one should not do that. Okay, so that's something. As for follow your imam, if the masjid is doing it and you want to do it, Ibrahim, follow the imam. Okay, even though it's not something that we do, follow the imam. Stay with the jama'ah, stay with the community. What would Imam Abu Hanifa have done if he was behind Imam Shafi? What would Imam Shafi do if he was behind Abu Hanifa? Remember, there's always this idea of following the leader, following the ummah, staying with the jama'ah, even if personally you have a different view on something. Okay, so unless it's like completely something that's out of the blue, otherwise stick with the jama'ah, stick with the community as much as possible, and bring change in gentle ways. A lot of communities, they have these youngsters that learn a few Quran and a little bit of hadith and a little bit of this and that, and they come in and they completely try and rock the community, and it causes a lot of dissension. The best way to do it is to work with the community, to educate the community, to teach the community, and bring changes. I'm not saying that uh, bid'ah and things can creep in. Sometimes things can creep into our community over time, and people lose sight of what's a real purpose. But then Islah needs to be also done. So there's a balance between both of them. Tamam, inshallah ta'ala. Anyone else have any more questions? Okay, so we should reach out to people, educate ourselves about different positions. I was talking about this in the masjid, that you should educate yourself about different positions. So when it comes to people that you disagree with, so what does the Jewish community believe in terms of Palestine or Israel? What are their views? What is the Jewish community in Britain? What are their views on this? Are they all pro-Israeli? Are there people who are pro-Israeli but they're critical of the government and so forth? So we should be aware of these nuances as well. And this happens to all religious communities. We should be aware. Previously, in the madrasa system, they used to teach people about all of this. So they used to teach people about different religions, People used to study the Bible. Ulama used to study the Bible, so they would know at what points the Quran and the Bible come together, and what points there are differences, and what points there are differences in theology. Because we left that study, because we don't really study the Bible, we don't really study the Torah, we don't have scholars who are experts in this. We don't have our own, we don't really have Sheikh Ahmad Didats. We don't have many of them who study these books. I mean, you have a few who are in universities, but most ulama are completely unaware of the scriptures. Not that everybody needs to study it, but it's useful to be aware of their positions on their views on many, many issues. So that's the benefit of dialogue. Remember, if you sit with somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that you agree with them. So I might have someone on my channel, for example, and he might be someone that's not a Muslim, and he might have a worldview that's completely different to mine. Just by having them on my channel doesn't mean I endorse them. What I'm doing is I'm having a dialogue with them to learn from them, and they can learn from me. We can find our differences and we can find our similarities. And sometimes that helps people, right? It removes barriers, and it clears confusion. If I'm on a platform with somebody, on a stage with somebody, and you'll often find me doing this, it doesn't necessarily mean that I endorse everything that it stands for. It usually means that I'm there because I want to present my point of view. Okay. So for us, it's very, very important. We have a word for it, like we have kalam, which is this idea in theology of discussing with one another, refining your arguments, strengthening your arguments, because you only know how to strengthen your argument if you don't, until you know what your opponent is saying. So you need to be aware of this, and it only strengthens you because we're not weak. Nothing in our religion is hidden. We don't have secrets in our religion. We don't hide things, and there's nothing in our religion that's fundamentally flawed. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Our religion is very clear. It's bayyin. It's very clear as day. Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has left us a religion that's hanif, very clear, very distinct, and we just follow it. And we just need to present it to people. Let me ask you a question. How many of you watching this right now have actually gone out of your way to explain our religion to people at a very basic level to people? Like, I've met so many people who don't know basics of Islam, who just all they know about Islam is what they see in the media. How many of us have made an effort to reach out to people and just tell them the basics of our religion, just to educate them about our faith? I mean, if we're living in this land, Ibrahim asked, I think, earlier about hijrah. I mean, one of the questions we need to ask is how many of us have fulfilled the obligation of living here, which is to give da'wah, to call people, or at least inform people, to give them the correct understanding of our faith without getting into all the details. So that's important if you're going to live here, because what that does is it creates alliances, but it also allows people to understand our religion, even the basics. Of course, even the basics. How many of us actually do that? And this is what I'm doing my YouTube channel. I'm trying to educate Muslims, but also non-Muslims, I hope, inshallah ta'ala, to learn about my faith. It's my duty. Allah will ask me and you on the day of Qiyamah that you lived in Great Britain and you benefited from everything that country had to offer, but you never made an effort to reach out to the indigenous people there. You never made an effort to reach out to them and just tell them the basics of your faith, to teach them about who Allah is, to teach them about the Prophet, to explain to them the basic concepts, or even write something that could be useful to government agencies or agents or civil agencies that they could use. Yeah. So this is very, very important. We all have to do this. This is our duty. We can talk about how negative the environment is. We can talk about how negative, hostile it is. But how many of us have tried to reduce the hostility by just creating understanding? Yeah. In Islamic society, how rulings being implemented in modern times are dress codes. There was no implementation of dress codes in Islamic world. People, as long as they were modestly dressed, if you dress modestly, that was it. Muslims, the Muslim state was very minimalist. Let me tell you this: it didn't intervene into private affairs. It's not like modern states which tell you how to dress, like in France. In Caliphate, the Caliph didn't get involved in these matters. They as long as you dressed modestly and you weren't causing public disorder, the Muslims left you alone. The authorities left you alone. So that's important to bear in mind. But if you look at Wael Hallaq's work, especially his book, The Impossible State, he argues this, and this is a non-Muslim arguing this. He says the Muslim world was very minimalist. People were allowed to freely live their lives. And I've talked about this before. Whereas in the modern nation states, the nation states that we live in, things are being forced upon us. Things are being, really pushed upon us. So it's completely diametrically opposed. Yeah, we need to reach out to these people. I mean, the least we can do is tell them about our faith. The least we can do. I mean, if we don't talk to them, they won't know us, right? And this is something that I'm a big believer in. Yeah? To have dialogue. I'm not just talking about interfaith. I'm in a meeting, Nika. Hi. Look, I'm in a live stream. So I'm not just talking about interfaith and that sort of stuff. I'm talking about just broadly speaking. You don't have to do like da'wah and set up da'wah stalls. Just getting to know your neighbors, just talking to them when you're just walking past and having conversations with them at work, talking to people about your faith. You're not preaching to them. You're not trying to convert them, but you're just basically telling them that this is what Islam is. And if they have more questions, they can always come to you because you can become an ambassador for your faith. Does that make sense, everyone? Very, very important. Some of the things I'm saying are really obvious, but we seem to have lost sight of them. Okay, I think we're running out of time. Lovely talking to you all once again. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I need to go for Maghrib, so please forgive me. Remember me in your prayers as I will remember you in my prayers. Inshallah, if all goes well, I will see you next week. Okay, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Now I'm not